So, what does it actually mean to be dead? It sounds like a simple question, right? For most of history, the answer was simple. But as we're about to see, modern medicine has turned this into one of the most complex and, honestly, profound questions of our time.
Okay, picture this because it happens in ICUs every single day. The monitors are beeping, showing a steady heartbeat. A ventilator is pushing air into the lungs, but the doctors tell you there's no brain activity at all. So what's the answer? Are they alive or are they dead? This one scenario throws us right into the deep end of the uncertainty our own technology has created.
And that's exactly where we're going to start, exploring this incredibly blurred line between life and death. It's a line that's become the absolute center of some really intense medical, ethical, and even legal debates. You know, for almost all of human history, figuring out if someone was dead was pretty straightforward. If they weren't breathing and their heart wasn't beating, they were gone. But then, the mechanical ventilator came along. Suddenly, we could keep the heart and lungs going long after the brain was, well, irreversibly damaged. All of a sudden, those classic signs of life just weren't reliable anymore. So, we went from this world of black and white certainty to one of deep, deep ambiguity. Our own technology gave us this incredible power to sustain biological functions, but in doing that, it completely smudged the line between being alive and being dead. And that created a huge critical need for a whole new way of thinking about this. So, how do we find any clarity in all this confusion? Well, the source material we're digging into today argues that the answer is actually pretty elegant. It's all about breaking the problem down into three distinct elements. And this quote right here from a paper by Bernat and his colleagues that are source references really hits the nail on the head. They argued that we get into trouble because we tend to lump everything together, which just creates a ton of confusion. Their solution? We have to carefully separate the definition of death from the medical standard for it, and then separate that from the tests used to prove it. So their framework breaks this massive problem down into three much simpler questions. First, what is death as a concept? Second, where in the body do we look to see that it's happened? And third, how do we prove it with specific medical tests? See? By keeping these three things separate, the whole debate starts to make a lot more sense. Okay, let's start with step one, the definition. Think of this as the big philosophical idea. It's not about a specific organ, it's about the concept itself. The definition that's really taken hold in a lot of medical circles is this: death is the moment the body loses its ability to work as an integrated whole, when it stops being a single, unified organism and becomes just a collection of cells and organs being kept going by machines. All right, next up is the criterion. This is what connects that abstract definition to an actual physical place. So, if death is the loss of that integrating function, where's the master controller for that function? Well, the answer is the brain. The whole idea here is that the complete and irreversible destruction of the entire brain is what actually fulfills that definition of death. And finally, we get to step three, the tests. This is where the rubber meets the road, right at the patient's bedside. How do doctors know for sure that the criterion, the destruction of the brain, has actually happened? Well, they use a whole battery of tests. They check for basic brainstem reflexes, they do an apnea test to see if the patient can even try to breathe on their own, and sometimes they'll use scans to prove there's zero blood flowing to the brain. Okay, so now that we have this awesome three-part framework, we can use it to really understand the massive historical shift in how we determine death. This move from focusing on the heart to focusing on the brain. For centuries, it was all about the cardiopulmonary criterion. If your heart and lungs stopped, you were dead. It was the undisputed standard. But in the 1950s, something came along that was a total game changer: CPR. It proved that a stopped heart wasn't necessarily the final word. It could be reversed. This completely shattered the old standard and forced the medical world to find a new, truly irreversible point of no return. And that search led directly to the famous 1968 Harvard report, which formally introduced the idea of the neurological criterion, or what we all now call brain death. Now, this leads us to a really subtle but incredibly profound distinction: the difference between what causes death and what actually is death. So, for example, a heart attack isn't death itself. It's the event that causes death by starving the brain of blood and oxygen. And this right here is the absolute core of the neurological argument. The heart? It's just a pump. A crucial one for sure, but its failure only matters because it leads to the destruction of the brain. The destruction of the brain, on the other hand, is the death of the organism as a whole. It's the final, definitive event. But this is where things get really, really controversial. We're about to dive into a puzzle that all hinges on the meaning of just one single word: irreversible. I mean, when we say that death is irreversible, we all know what that means, right? It can't be undone. It's final. It's foundational to our whole concept of what death is. Seems pretty obvious. But the source material we're looking at sounds a pretty serious alarm here. What happens when a word with such a final, absolute meaning gets subtly changed, especially when something as important as organ donation is on the line? Let's look at a real-world case study, something called the Pittsburgh Protocol, which is used for organ donation after cardiac death. Here's how it works. A patient has a do not resuscitate order, and their life support is withdrawn. They then go into cardiac arrest. Now, the protocol says that after waiting just 2 minutes, doctors can declare that patient legally dead and start recovering their organs. And right here, this is the heart of the controversy. This protocol only works because it redefines irreversible. The normal definition means the condition can't be reversed, period. But the protocol uses what the source calls an auto-irreversible definition. This means the patient can't recover on their own. But here's the kicker. Their heart could absolutely be restarted with CPR. The condition is reversible, just not by the body itself.
So what's going on here isn't a medical discovery. The source calls it verbal legislation. By just changing the definition of a word, the protocol allows patients who are technically still revivable to be declared dead. The source is very clear. The ethical goals, like honoring a patient's wish to donate, are noble, but the method is deeply problematic because it fundamentally changes who we classify as dead.
Okay, let's pull all of this together. Let's talk about why this debate isn't just some philosophical exercise, but something with massive, real-world consequences. Every single thing we've talked about, the definition, the criterion, the tests, and especially the meaning of irreversible, directly impacts what happens in hospital rooms every single day. These concepts are what draw the line that tells a doctor when to stop trying to save a life and when an organ procurement team can begin its work. And as the source material so powerfully concludes, a stopped heart is a great predictor that death is probably right around the corner, but it is not death itself. And using it as the actual criterion for death, especially when it's still reversible, is confusing a prediction with the actual event. And all of this leaves us with one final, incredibly challenging question. Our technology is only going to get more powerful, and it's going to keep blurring that line even more. So, who gets to decide where that line is drawn? Is it doctors, lawyers, ethicists, or is it a conversation that all of us need to have? It's a question we're all going to have to confront sooner or later.